The autumn fog over the Hungarian plain was incredibly thick and sticky. It settled on the soldiers' heavy woolen greatcoats like a cold sweat, and like a cotton blanket, muffled the sounds of clanking tracks. It was the second half of October 1944. In the command post, hastily set up in the deep cellar of a half-destroyed peasant's estate, the air could be cut with a knife. It was thoroughly permeated with the smell of burnt diesel fuel, damp, cracked earth, and acrid tobacco, which was smoked incessantly. On a roughly hewn wooden table, illuminated only by the dim, flickering light of an old kerosene lamp, lay a staff map, densely covered with red and blue arrows of offensives. Over it, leaning with heavy hands on the edges of the table, bent a man whose name would soon become synonymous with one of the most controversial and difficult maneuvers of this historical period. General Pliev, commander of the renowned cavalry-mechanized group, nervously and rhythmically tapped the tabletop with a captured German chronometer. The second hand inexorably counted down time, which he categorically no longer had. His elite troops, hardened in dozens of battles, thrown by the command into a deep breakthrough, suddenly found themselves in a dead-end stone bag, squeezed from all sides. How could it have happened that such powerful formations were completely cut off from their supply bases and were now systematically being rolled over by the steel rollers of German tank divisions? Before we delve into a detailed, uncompromising analysis of this incredible logistical and tactical paradox, I ask you to take a second and help promote our channel. Be sure to subscribe to updates, like this video, and share this material with friends. Your support is the fuel that allows us to create even deeper, unconventional historical investigations and seek the truth where others see only dry reports. To truly understand the entire anatomy of the impending catastrophe, we need to mentally step back several strategic steps and look at the large-scale geopolitical chessboard of Europe that bleak autumn. Hungary at that time remained, in essence, the last major and combat-ready ally of the Third Reich. The High Command in Berlin held on to these flat territories with a truly death grip, and there were strong economic reasons for this. It was here, in the west of the country, that critically important oil fields and powerful refineries were located, which literally, drop by drop, fed the weakening but still deadly German war machine. The Soviet High Command, in turn, sought to remove Budapest from the geopolitical game with one incredibly powerful, crushing blow, depriving the enemy of resources. The commander of the troops of the Second Ukrainian Front, the ambitious and experienced Marshal Rodion Malinovsky, received an unambiguous order from Stavka: at all costs, cut off the retreat routes of the huge German and Hungarian armies bogged down in the forests and mountains of Transylvania. For this grandiose goal, a tool was chosen that seemed absolutely flawless and fail-safe on staff maps: General Pliev's cavalry-mechanized group. This was a truly unique, specific formation, an incredible historical hybrid of modern heavy tank corps and traditional cavalry divisions, specially created by Soviet military thought for swift, irresistible deep envelopments and raids into enemy rear areas. It is precisely here that we clearly see the fatal error, the fundamental miscalculation laid down at the very earliest stage of armchair planning. The very idea of maneuver warfare, the idea of deep, dagger-like breakthroughs in the classic style of a reinterpreted blitzkrieg, literally blinded the High Soviet Command. The Front Command placed an absolute bet on incredible speed of advance, completely ignoring the basic, boring, but vital laws of military logistics. Pliyev received a categorical order to push only forward, towards the city of Debrecen and further, to the strategic hub of Nyíregyháza, ruthlessly cutting and crushing the enemy's established defenses. And initially, in the first days of the operation, everything went as smoothly as a brilliant parade march. Heavy tanks with armed assault troops on their armor and elusive Cossack patrols immediately crushed hastily organized roadblocks, advancing into enemy territory for tens of kilometers a day, reporting captured trophies. But few researchers notice that it was precisely at this triumphant moment, far behind the advancing Soviet troops, that an invisible, quiet, but absolutely fatal drama began to unfold inexorably. The further the advanced units of the cavalry-mechanized group moved away from their stationary supply bases, the thinner, the more transparent became the single logistic thread that connected them with the possibility of continuing the fight. The first serious internal conflict of this entire story entered the game. A direct clash of human ambitions and the harsh, dirty reality of the front. General Pliev, being by his deep nature a man of incredibly unrestrained temperament, perfectly embodied the classic psychological archetype of a dashing swashbuckler. This ancient behavioral pattern dictates to the commander a desire for constant, ceaseless movement forward, for attack for the sake of attack itself, for complete disregard of boring logistical calculations and paperwork. For a person of such a disposition, any stop, even to replenish ammunition, was morally tantamount to a shameful defeat. He drove his tired corps further and further north into the Hungarian plain, genuinely intoxicated by the illusion of a swift, definitive triumph. Alarming reports from rear commanders that heavy trucks with precious fuel were hopelessly lagging behind, stuck up to their axles in impassable autumn mud, and that exhausted horses had been lacking basic fodder for several days, were irritably cast aside. For the group's headquarters, only one thing mattered: the capture of another settlement to send a triumphant radio message up the chain of command. However, war is always an equation with two unknowns. On the other side of the extended front, a completely different, calculating mind was at work. The German grouping in this sector was led by generals who were the absolute opposite of the Soviet command. They represented the archetype of the cold technocrat. Army Group Commander General Johannes Fretter-Pico and his subordinates did not panic at the sight of a deeply breached front and the fleeting Cossack burkas in the rear. On the contrary, they sat with icy calmness over maps and coolly analyzed the configuration of the extended Soviet wedge, which, with each new kilometer covered, became longer, thinner, and more vulnerable. Instead of throwing reserves into frontal, senseless counterattacks, the German command began methodically, secretly, to draw its best forces to the very base of this protruding wedge. Elite Wehrmacht tank divisions, equipped with heavy armored vehicles, slowly and meticulously lined up in perfect formations for crushing flank attacks. Academic historians still hotly debate the true causes of what happened next, but I invite you to look at this situation from a completely different angle, precisely through the prism of army intelligence and the psychology of information perception. The official post-war version often and very conveniently states that the appearance of powerful German tank reserves on the flanks came as an absolutely complete, shocking surprise to the Soviet command. But it is precisely here that we encounter the first extremely serious doubt in the official interpretation of events. Ask yourself, did the extensive network of aerial reconnaissance, patrolling aircraft, and deep agents in the rear really fail to notice the large-scale transfer of entire tank corps with thousands of vehicles and tens of thousands of soldiers? This sounds extremely unconvincing. Most likely, the front headquarters regularly received these alarming data. but they too strongly dissonated with the already adopted Moscow-approved plan for a victorious offensive. In management psychology, this is called the confirmation bias. The high command desperately wanted to see the enemy fleeing in panic, and therefore subconsciously ignored, dismissed as unreliable, all signals about the impending death trap. While long red arrows were confidently drawn on maps in high, safe headquarters awaiting the swift capture of cities, down below, at the level of the frozen, muddy Hungarian dirt, its own, far more terrible and honest micro-history was unfolding. This is a history not of generals, but of ordinary people, hostages of grand ambitions. Imagine the state of the rank and file of the mechanized cavalry group in those fateful days. The driver-mechanic of the legendary T-34 tank hasn't closed his eyes for 2 days. Inside the cramped fighting compartment, there's a smell of spilled diesel, gunpowder fumes from a recent battle, and unwashed human bodies. The fuel gauge needle trembles menacingly at 0, and the driver understands. His multi-ton armored vehicle, a formidable weapon of offense, will turn into an absolutely useless pile of immobile metal in a couple of kilometers, a perfect target for enemy artillery. The shells in the ammunition rack are counted one by one. Only 3 are left, and the crew commander has forbidden firing at unclear targets. Nearby, along the sides of the tank-ravaged road, cavalry trudges. Tired horsemen have dismounted to spare their exhausted animals. The horses, who haven't had proper oats for almost a week, stumble, their flanks heaving heavily, thick steam coming from their mouths. The cavalryman, gripping the reins with fingers numb from the damp, piercing wind, looks at his horse with longing. He realizes the terrible paradox of this mobile warfare. His sharp saber, his dash, and the loyalty of his war animal mean absolutely nothing against the cold Krupp steel of German armored vehicles, ambushing them behind the nearest forest. This feeling of growing isolation, the understanding that the rear had fallen behind forever, and ahead lay only the unknown, weighed heavily on the soldiers' shoulders like lead. They were no longer the tip of an attacking spear. They were gradually turning into game, driven deep into the forest. By the 20th of cold October, the situation reached an absolute ringing point of no return. The advanced units of the cavalry-mechanized group, incredibly exhausted by continuous heavy marches and skirmishes, at the limit of human capabilities, burst into the city of Nyíregyháza. This was the peak of their tactical advance, the pinnacle of operational success, which was immediately reported to the Stavka. But this same pinnacle instantly turned into a gaping abyss. As soon as Soviet tanks consolidated their positions in the city streets, the steel German pincers clanged shut far behind them, cutting off the last narrow bottleneck of the breakthrough. Supplies ceased completely and irrevocably. Cavalry regiments, completely deprived of maneuver space in the harsh conditions of dense urban development and hermetically blocked highways, became an excellent, defenseless target for methodically working enemy heavy artillery. The cold, biting autumn rain ceaselessly mixed with brick dust from falling shells. Battalion radio stations crackled and strained. Radio operators chafed their fingers raw on keys, but could not break through the dense, etheric interference and powerful German electronic warfare systems. The group found itself blind and deaf, a heavy, oppressive wait for help that, as it became clear to every soldier, would never come. At this incredibly tense, pivotal moment in our history, being at the very emotional center of the narrative, I want to ask you, the viewers, directly. How would you yourself act if you were in the shoes of a commander, cut off completely from your main forces, with exhausted men and empty fuel tanks? Would you try to dig trenches? Go into a deft defense in the city ruins? and passively wait for a mythical de-blockade from outside, risking losing everyone to hunger and artillery shelling? Or would you give the heavy order to abandon all valuable equipment and break through with a bloody battle through the lines of a well-fed and ready enemy? Be sure to write your detailed opinion in the comments under this video. Your outside perspective is incredibly important for our common understanding of the psychology of leadership in the most extreme, hopeless conditions. Meanwhile, inside the shrinking ring of encirclement, real organizational chaos began. The beautiful armchair illusion of mobile warfare finally and utterly shattered against the competently constructed, echeloned German defense. The very idea of a daring deep breakthrough proved absolutely untenable without reliable, clockwork logistical support. It is here that a second, deeper philosophical conflict of this military operation emerges. We see the tragic clash of an outdated, romanticized belief in cavalry maneuver by assault with the merciless, mathematically precise machine logic of industrial war of attrition. Live horses, no matter how fantastically resilient they were, could not withstand armored vehicles with optical sights, and the extraordinary personal courage of dismounted horsemen in no way compensated for the complete absence of shells for anti-tank guns. Equipment left without fuel turned from a weapon into a burden, into steel coffins on tracks that crews were forced to abandon directly on the narrow European streets. When the real, unembellished understanding of the scale of the impending catastrophe finally reached the front headquarters, convulsive, feverish attempts began to somehow rectify the situation and carve out a narrow corridor to the encircled corps. But the German armored units, having seized the initiative, brilliantly and skillfully utilized the difficult local terrain and atrocious weather conditions, coolly repelling the scattered attacks of Soviet infantry, attempting to break through from the outside time and again. Inside the cauldron itself, in Nyíregyháza, the count was no longer in days, but in hours. Commander Pliyev faced the most difficult, psyche-shattering choice of his career. He had to, at all costs, evacuate and preserve his men, the backbone of his army. And here we closely encounter the second serious doubt in the established official interpretation of these events. In the smoothed-over post-war memoirs of the higher general staff, it is often written that the order to break out of the encirclement was clearly sanctioned from above, meticulously thought out and organized by the front headquarters almost to the minute. However, a thorough independent audit of fragmentary radio messages and reports from that turbulent time clearly shows that this most difficult decision was made exclusively on the ground, by commanders in the cauldron, under conditions of the severest time deficit and a complete lack of reliable communication with their own forces. It was a forced, absolutely spontaneous surge of despair, the instinct of self-preservation of an army cornered, and by no means a brilliantly planned tactical maneuver of withdrawal to pre-prepared positions. The process of breaking out of Nyíregyháza itself rapidly turned into a tragic, exhausting march, knee-deep in icy mud. To have a chance to survive and move faster, the troops had to make a difficult decision: to destroy most of their newest military equipment with their own hands. Tons of explosives were put to use. Soldiers blew up stalled tanks, burned secret staff radio stations with tears in their eyes, disabled the breeches of heavy artillery pieces so that they would not fall into enemy hands. An elite group, specially created to be the striking tip of the advancing spear, now frantically carved out a narrow path back, bleeding with every kilometer. German motorized armored groups acted methodically, like robots, without unnecessary emotions. They moved on parallel courses, cut off retreating long columns, mercilessly crushed them into small, disorganized groups and systematically suppressed resistance. This was the cruelest historical retribution for the criminal disregard of the rules of military art, for the blind hope in the proverbial avos, blind luck, and the exorbitant general's ambitions, who wanted to take the city by the desired date at any cost. The highest culmination of this grand drama unfolded not in spacious headquarters, but on nameless, narrow dirt roads, completely waterlogged from icy autumn downpours. Soviet soldiers, deprived of their usual armored support and artillery umbrella, broke through the enemy's skillfully placed barriers using only light small arms, hand grenades, and sheer willpower. Officers went into attack in the first ranks alongside the privates, understanding that the chances of survival were minimal. In these bleak hours, the true, unfeigned resilience of ordinary people who found themselves against their will hostages of high strategic errors of the leadership was revealed. They emerged from the closing ring utterly exhausted, having lost their best comrades, forever deprived of equipment, in tattered greatcoats, but still preserving their battle standards under their tunics. The grand cavalry-mechanized group, de facto, for a period of time, simply ceased to exist as a cohesive, combat-ready operational-level unit. The front's striking fist was ground to blood against German steel. When the thick dust and smoke over the Hungarian battlefields finally settled, an uncomfortable time for summing up began. And it is here, in analyzing the results, that a third, perhaps the most important and cynical, doubt arises in the official, established historiography. Soviet information reports of that time cheerfully and joyfully reported to the entire country about the successful, planned completion of the Debrecen operation, about the capture of new, important territories, and the effective tying down of large operational forces of the German enemy. But if we cast aside the propagandistic husk, can we seriously call a maneuver a resounding success when it ultimately led to the irretrievable loss of a huge number of the latest armored vehicles, and for a long time incapacitated the most elite, trained units of the advancing front? Official history always prefers to smooth over sharp corners, inventing vague terms, calling this defeat a forced tactical retreat or complex maneuvering defense. However, a strict, unbiased audit of generals' decisions and logistical schedules relentlessly shows that in reality, it was a classic, exemplary tactical failure, directly caused by dizziness from initial easy successes and an underestimation of the enemy's analytical capabilities. The profound lessons that you and I can draw from those distant, dramatic events near Debrecen and Nyíregyháza extend far beyond the narrow confines of academic military history. They are absolutely universal and applicable to almost any sphere of modern human activity, be it ambitious corporate business, government crisis management, or even personal strategic planning. The main historical resonance of this poignant story lies in understanding the fact that no external swiftness, no ostentatious decisiveness of leadership, and even sincere personal bravery of performers on the ground can long compensate for the absence of a solid foundation of training, reliable intelligence, and dependable rear support. The irrational ambitions of a leader, detached from the objective mathematical reality of what is happening, inevitably lead the entire structure to collapse. The archetype of the reckless swashbuckler who rushes into battle without looking back is only good for a short, tactical thrust, when you need to inspire the team for one sprint. But ultimate, large-scale strategic victory is always ensured by the archetype of the cold technocrat, A leader who knows how to meticulously count resources, conserve people, build infrastructure, and anticipate the non-obvious moves of his intelligent opponent several steps ahead. We can see the very same patterns today. Modern large corporations repeatedly make the same fatal historical mistake. In pursuit of beautiful reports, they throw all available forces and budgets into the swift capture of a new, undeveloped market, completely forgetting to simultaneously build the boring but necessary support and logistics infrastructure. And as a result, just like the Soviet Corps in '44, they suddenly find themselves in a dense financial kettle, cut off from reliable sources of funding and methodically, mercilessly suppressed by more calculating, systemic competitors. The history of General Pliev's mechanized cavalry group is not just a story about tanks and cavalry. It is a powerful, timeless warning that your reliable supply line is ultimately always more important and valuable than a bright front line. Returning to the very beginning of our narrative, we seem to come full circle and once again find ourselves in that damp, cold cellar of a Hungarian peasant estate, where the kerosene lamp still flickers dimly and uneasily. The dry, mechanical ticking of the trophy German clock in the Soviet general's hands no longer seems to us just a random sound from a time-counting mechanism. Now, knowing the finale of this drama, it sounds like an inexorable historical verdict on an entire bygone era of blind, desperate faith in a decisive maneuver at any, even the most terrible cost. The autumn, raw fog outside the broken cellar window mercifully conceals the abandoned, mangled equipment and fields plowed by explosions, which have become a silent, eternal reproach to human self-conceit and planning errors. This story, written in the blood of a simple soldier, teaches us one immutable truth. In any complex coordinate system, be it the gigantic war machine of autumn 1944 or your own complex modern business project, the unshakable foundation of logistics, objective risk assessment, and an absolutely sober, dispassionate calculation must always, without exception, precede the most ambitious leap forward. Otherwise, your most rapid and beautiful assault inevitably risks turning into a very long, painful, and tragic journey back, through a line of errors that could have been avoided.